Hi again. We're in William Cetnar's testimony in this book, We Left Jehovah's Witnesses by Edmund C. Gruss, which I recommend everyone. It's in our basic library for Jehovah's Witnesses. And that's a playlist, by the way, as well. Basic library for Jehovah's Witnesses has, I don't know, a dozen or so videos by now. And this section is detailing William Cetnar's advancement in headquarters in Brooklyn, Bethel, back in the late 40s and early 50s. The section is entitled, I had no background for an objective evaluation of the evidence. The guiding principle was conformity to the society's position. William Cetnar says, in addition to my work in the service department discussed previously, I was also assigned to do research for articles and worked under Bill Wheeler of the editorial department in this capacity. What were my qualifications for such work? None. Often all I knew about a subject was what I was able to gain by reading various treatments on it. I had no background for an objective evaluation of the evidence. The guiding principle was conformity to the society's position. If material agreed, it was utilized. If it did not, it was rejected. From my observations at headquarters, I would conclude that this lack of qualifications would characterize the majority of the editorial staff. Most had no training beyond high school. This is also true of the Society's president, N.H. Knorr, who entered Bethel service upon graduation from high school and worked his way up through the ranks. Witnesses are discouraged from going to college and from reading non-witness books, for we were told these were put together by worldly men. Recently, a talk was given at a convention held at the Forum in Inglewood, California, where witnesses were told by A.D. Schroeder that they should not read non-witness publications because this would take hours of time which could be better spent in witness materials or service. They were told that if the books contained anything worthwhile, the society would take it out, condense it, and give them something they could read in a few minutes. This actually was a subtle form of censorship, since it was already true that any books about the society by former witnesses could not be read. Witnesses were being restricted to reading nothing but Watchtower materials. In addition to research projects, I worked on Theocratic Ministry School talk outlines, and during 1951 and 1952, I wrote a monthly article for The Informant, now Kingdom Ministry. By the way, this is all written in the 60s. Because I was on the Bethel speakers staff, I spoke at a number of Kingdom halls and at several of the large conventions. For approximately a year, I wrote and produced a half-hour program for the society-owned radio station WBBR. And now the new heading is, if I were on the translation committee, I would want my name to be kept secret also. Work on the New World Translation was being done and much was completed while I was in Bethel. The translation committee requested that the names of the translators remain secret even after their deaths, according to the Jehovah's Witness and the Divine Purpose book, which was published at the end of the 50s. Knowing who the translators were, for this was common knowledge at Bethel, if I were on the translation committee, I would want my name to be kept secret also. The reason for the anonymity of the translators was twofold. One, the qualifications of the translators could not be checked and evaluated. And two, there would be no one to assume the responsibility for the translation. However, when Franz was asked in the courtroom in Scotland, that's Fred Franz, why the secrecy? He said, quote, because the Committee of Translation wanted it to remain anonymous and not seek any glory or honor in the making of a translation and having any names attached thereto, end of quote. The attorney replied, quote, writers of books and translators do not always get glory and honor for their efforts, do they? Would it not, Cetnar says, would it not be of the utmost importance to know the men, their qualifications and credentials, men to whom we would entrust our spiritual lives? We certainly would not put trust in a surgeon who would not give us his name or credentials. It was interesting to me that at Bethel, these translators took no precautions to keep themselves anonymous. They would get up from the dining room table early and all leave together in the president's limousine for Staten Island. There they would remain, sometimes absent from Bethel for weeks at a time. From my observation, N.H. Knorr, F.W. Franz, A.D. Schroeder, G.D. Gangas, and Milton Henschel met together in these translation sessions. Aside from Vice President Franz, and his training was limited, none of the committee members had adequate schooling or background to function as critical Bible translators. Franz's ability to do a scholarly job of translating Hebrew is open to serious question. This came out in the Scottish Court of Sessions in November 1954. The following exchange of questions and answers between the attorney and Franz is taken from the trial transcript. Quote, "Have you also made yourself familiar with Hebrew?" Answer, yes. Question, so that you have a substantial linguistic apparatus at your command? Answer, yes, for use in my biblical work. Question, I think you are able to read and follow the Bible in Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Spanish, Portuguese, German, and French? Answer, yes. Question, you yourself read and speak Hebrew, do you? Answer, I do not speak Hebrew. Question, you do not? Answer, no. Question, can you yourself translate that into Hebrew? Answer, which? Question, that fourth verse of the second chapter of Genesis. Answer, you mean here. We assume at this point that the attorney has put a text right in front of Fred Franz on the desk. You mean here? Question, yes. No, I wouldn't attempt to do that. And Cetnar says what Franz wouldn't attempt to translate into Hebrew was a simple exercise with which an average first or second year Hebrew student in seminary would have no difficulty. This conclusion was stated by a qualified teacher of Hebrew. Because of the inadequacy of the translators, the translations which resulted were, in many cases, not those which were accurate renderings of the original languages, but rather they conveyed what the witnesses believed. This is verified by many qualified Bible scholars, and among them Dr. Anthony Hoekema, who commented in his book, The Four Major Cults, quote, their New World Translation of the Bible is by no means an objective rendering of the sacred text into modern English, but it is a biased translation in which many of the peculiar teachings of the Watchtower Society are smuggled into the text of the Bible itself. Cetnar continues, in March 1954, I was assigned to interview the well-known Bible translator, Dr. Edgar J. Goodspeed, for his evaluation of the first volume of the New World Translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. I was to try to get his endorsement of it. During the 2-hour visit with him, it was obvious that he knew the volume well, because he could cite the page numbers where the readings he objected to were found. One reading he pointed out as especially awkward and grammatically poor was in Judges 14 verse 3. That is on page 803 of the first edition of the New World Translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, where Samson is made to say, quote, her get for me, end of quote. As I left, Dr. Goodspeed was asked if he could recommend the translation for the general public. He answered, no, I'm afraid I could not do that. The grammar is regrettable. Be careful on the grammar. Be sure you have that right. End of Goodspeed quote. I'll put in a link to my personal testimony as to how it was that, knowing that the great scholars of Christendom were available to me because I was a book collector, I didn't land hard like Vivian did, and maybe the great majority of witnesses do, because of loss of faith in anything, really, and especially the work of the great scholars of the church has been available for hundreds of years. There's a richness to the available commentaries, Bible tools, and the Watchtower is in effect admitted that by having a large library, even in Bethel. I don't know if it's still there, but it was in the days of Ray Franz. And it was a puzzlement to those who were assigned to do the aid to Bible understanding that double thing was going on at Bethel level, i.e. these books can be consulted, but it's very obvious when you open it to the first title page where these books come from, that is Christendom. So the admission is that there are reputable and reliable scholars in this system of religion that we abhor and call Babylon the Great and say is the lurk of the devil and the demons. This double thing caused me consternation. So I wrote a tract on this back in the 1990s, and that's available on our website, by the way, under the name He Gave Teachers. And the videos based on that document are starting with the one I'm putting on your screen now. How I left the Watchtower and landed softly. Gives a little bit of my testimony as to the value of the books that made it possible for me to make a smooth transition from one form of unbelief to a real, one form of unbelief, by that I mean a cult, to belief, true belief in the Lord Jesus Christ, and the fact that He has a church on earth that He can be trusted when He says, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it." Next time, when it gets off the 6th floor, it is the truth. That's an actual quote from Nathan Knorr back in 1952.